He's not the right fit for the showcase. Put the cleaner's kid on the tech crew." Dale Coburn said it. The way people say things they have already decided are not worth saying quietly. One hand adjusting his lapel, eyes moving past the 22-year-old standing at the center of the rehearsal floor, as though the young man were a piece of furniture someone had placed in the wrong room. "We need a particular image up there. You understand." The conductor, a compact, careful woman named Giselle Harmon, who had been running the Meridian Youth Jazz program for 11 years, started to say something. Dale Coburn's smile arrived before she could finish, and her sentence stopped. They moved Elias Bowen to the back. They gave his spot at the front mic to a boy named Connor Fife, whose father sat on the board of the Meridian Arts Foundation, whose trumpet playing was competent in the particular way that competent things are, when no one has ever needed them to be more than that. They told Elias the tech board needed someone who understood sound. They told him it was a compliment. They told him the showcase would run better with his ear behind the desk instead of in front of it. Elias said yes because his mother worked in that building, and he had done the arithmetic before anyone had to explain it to him. He had understood the arithmetic his whole life. The Meridian Community Arts Center sat at the corner of Broadview and a street that changed names twice before it reached the lake. It was a building that had been renovated twice in 30 years, and you could see both renovations if you knew where to look. The newer glass addition at the front and the older brick behind it that still had the original height markings penciled on the doorframe from when someone had measured children there decades ago. The foundation that ran it had money, or access to money, which in this city amounted to the same thing, and every spring it held its annual showcase. A night when the program's most advanced students performed for donors, board members, music journalists, and the particular species of wealthy Torontonian who attended charity events the way others attended church, for the comfort of being seen doing the right thing. Elias Bowen had been in the jazz program for 3 years. He played trumpet the way some people breathe, not because someone had taught him the mechanics, though someone had, but because the sound had always been waiting inside him, and the instrument was simply the door it used to get out. His instructor, a quiet man named Raymond Ossie, who had played session work for 30 years before coming to teach, had said once, carefully, the way careful people say important things, that in 3 decades of teaching he had encountered perhaps 4 students whose relationship to music was not learned. "You are the 5th, Raymond had told him. "Don't waste it." Elias's mother, Sandra Bowen, cleaned the center 3 mornings a week. She had done so for 9 years, long enough to know the particular echo of the main hall at 6 in the morning when the chairs were still up on the tables, long enough to have watched 4 different executive directors walk through without once meeting her eyes. She had pulled the strings she had, quiet strings, the kind available to a woman in her position, to get Elias into the program when he was 19, and watching him rehearse in that hall over the past 3 years had been the closest she had come in a long time to believing that the arithmetic might occasionally work out differently than it always had before. Dale Coburn had arrived as the new program director 8 months ago. He had come from a larger institution downtown with a longer name and a reputation for producing students who went on to conservatories and competitions, and the kinds of careers that looked good in annual reports. He wore his expertise the way certain men wore good suits, constantly, and in rooms where it wasn't strictly necessary. He had opinions about presentation, about narrative, about what a showcase needed to look like if it was going to attract the caliber of donor the foundation required to reach the next level. He used the phrase "the next level" often enough that it had started to lose meaning, the way any phrase does when it is deployed as a substitute for one. He had watched Elias in rehearsal exactly twice. Both times he had said nothing directly. Both times he had made a note on the clipboard he carried and moved on. And the notes, as far as anyone could tell, had not been about the music. Giselle Harmon had been running this program before Dale Coburn had heard of it. She had also been in this city long enough to know what kind of thing she was looking at when she watched Dale watch Elias, and what she was looking at made the back of her neck tighten in a way she recognized from experience. She had said what she needed to say to Dale privately and professionally. She had told him Elias was the most gifted student in the program by a margin that was not close. She had told him that pulling him from the showcase was not a musical decision. She had used the word optics because she knew Dale spoke that language, and she had intended it the way you intend a word when you want someone to hear the one sitting behind it. Dale had smiled at her the same way he had smiled when he cut off her sentence, and he had talked about vision and cohesion and the particular picture the board needed to see, and she had understood that the conversation was already finished before it started. The night of the showcase, Elias arrived early because arriving early was what he did. He had his trumpet case with him out of habit. He always had it with him. But he set it beside the tech desk without opening it and sat down in front of the board and stared at the sliders and thought about what it meant to be useful in a room where you had been put. The center filled slowly the way those rooms do. Voices coming in from the lobby, coats on the rack by the door, the particular sound of a crowd assembling that is half conversation and half performance of conversation. Elias could hear it from where he sat, could hear the string of names being exchanged at the entrance, the kind of names that got hyphenated in donor lists. And he ran a level check on the monitors and told himself the sound was the job tonight, and the job was what mattered. He had told himself that on the drive over. He had told himself again while his mother fixed the collar of his shirt in the kitchen of their apartment in Scarborough, her hands doing the careful thing they did when they were steadying something that didn't need steadying, because what they were actually steadying was her. "You'll be the best thing in that room tonight," she had said. "I'll be behind the desk tonight," he had said. She had pressed her palms flat against his chest for a moment, the way she had done when he was small and the world had been smaller, and she had not said anything else because there was nothing to say that they hadn't both already understood. He had the one thing he always brought, a small piece of his grandmother's sheet music. Not a full page, just a fragment, water-stained at the corner and folded twice into a square that fit in the breast pocket of his jacket. His grandmother, Elias Bowen, had played piano in a Jamaican church for 40 years. She had never recorded anything. She had never been asked. But she had pressed that fragment into his hand when he was 12 and told him the music in him came from somewhere he hadn't arrived at yet, and that the arriving was the whole point. He had kept it ever since, the way you keep something you do not fully understand but know enough not to put down. He touched it now through the fabric of his jacket and turned back to the board. An older man sat down beside him. Not at the board, beside it, in the folding chair someone had left near the tech desk, with the unhurried quality of a man who had been sitting in folding chairs in back corridors for so long that the chair had started to seem like his natural habitat. His name was Winston Addo, and he was the building's head of maintenance, and he had worked at the Meridian Center for 17 years, which meant he had been there longer than 2 full renovations, and every executive director Elias's mother had watched not meet her eyes. He didn't say anything for a while. He sat and looked at the stage where the students were doing final sound checks, and Elias let him sit because the silence felt companionable rather than awkward, which was a kind of gift from a stranger. "Heard you play last Thursday," Winston said finally. "Through the hall door. I was fixing the latch on the storage room." Elias adjusted a slider without looking up. Didn't know anyone was listening. That's usually when people play the truest. Winston looked at his hands, which were large and deliberate. The hands of someone who had spent decades knowing exactly what to do with them. "You play like your grandmother showed you something." Elias looked at him then. "Music's got memory in it," Winston said. "Certain people you can hear where it comes from. Goes back past them." There was a pause. On stage, Connor Fife was running his scales with the careful correctness of someone who had practiced the correct thing and wanted credit for it. The notes were right. They were only notes. "I had a thing once," Winston said, and his voice shifted the way voices do when they go back to something. "Not trumpet. Guitar. Classical, if you can believe it. Spent 4 years learning it properly. Lesson every week, the whole thing." He looked at the stage. There was a recital. Conservatory was sending scouts. My teacher said I had to be in it. Were you? Winston was quiet for a moment. I found a reason not to be. Too many reasons. Wrong room, wrong moment. People like me didn't walk into those rooms and say, "Here I am, listen." Not back then. Maybe not now either, most of the time. He looked at Elias sidelong. I kept finding the reasons until there weren't any more recitals. Elias said nothing. I'm 63 years old, Winston said, and I have changed the light bulbs in every room of this building for 17 years, and the one thing I know that's worth the breath it costs to say is this: staying out of the room is not the same as being safe. It feels that way. It isn't. What it is a debt. You pay it every morning for the rest of your life in time you don't get back. He stood slowly, the way people stand when their joints have opinions. I'm not telling you what to do tonight. You're 22. It's not my place. He picked up the toolkit he'd rested beside the chair. I'm just telling you what I know. He went back toward the maintenance corridor, and the door swung shut behind him, and Elias sat with the weight of what the man had left in the chair beside him. He wasn't alone long. The door from the green room opened, and Giselle Harmon came through it and crossed to the tech desk without hurrying. She had the look of someone who has made a decision and is done with the part of the process that involved doubt. She sat down where Winston had been sitting. I need you to know something, she said without preamble, because she was not a woman who believed in preamble when the point was already clear. What was done here tonight was not a musical decision. I want that said plainly where you can hear it. I know, Elias said. Knowing it and hearing someone say it out loud are different things, she said. I've watched a lot of talented kids get managed sideways in this business. Most of them never had it named for what it was. I'm naming it. He didn't answer. He looked at the stage. Connor is going to play the opening set, Giselle said. He'll do fine. He'll do exactly as fine as he always does, which is fine. She paused. The Foundation's music liaison is here tonight. Her name is Priya Johal. She is the person who decides which students get recommended for the Provincial Development Program. She has been to every showcase for 6 years. She has never once left one of these events without talking to me afterward about what she heard. Giselle looked at him steadily. She will be sitting in the 3rd row, left side, in a gray blazer, and she came here tonight to listen. Elias looked at the board in front of him. The set list has a gap at 40 minutes, Giselle said. I built it there. I want you to know it's there. She stood. She didn't say anything else. She went back through the green room door, and it closed behind her, and Elias sat in the returning quiet with everything he'd been carrying. Since the moment Dale Coburn had looked past him and decided the picture needed something other than what he was, he thought about the arithmetic his mother had done for 9 years in this building. He thought about the debt Winston had described. The kind you paid every morning in time you didn't get back. He thought about Connor Fife's careful, correct scales, and the difference between notes that were right and notes that were true. He thought about his grandmother's sheet music against his chest, water-stained and folded twice, the fragment of something that had never been recorded because it had never been asked for, still carrying the music anyway across 40 years and an ocean. He thought about what it cost to keep your hand off the door. At 38 minutes into the program, Connor Fife stepped back to the mic for the showcase centerpiece, a piece that had been selected because it was technically demanding and because it showed well the musical equivalent of a pressed suit. He played the opening phrase with precision. He played the second phrase with the same precision. And then something happened that happened to Connor Fife with a regularity that everyone in the program had learned to build around. He got in his own head. It wasn't catastrophic. It was subtler and in some ways worse than catastrophic. The notes kept coming, but the music left. The air went out of it. The piece continued the way a conversation continues after the person you're talking to has stopped listening. Technically present, fundamentally absent. People in the audience shifted. Glasses were lifted and set down. Someone near the back coughed. Priya Johal, 3rd row, gray blazer, did not move, but her expression did something that people who watch music for a living do when they hear a performance beginning to leave the room. At the tech desk, Elias heard it. He had heard the music leave the room before it reached the third row. He had been listening for exactly that. The way he listened for everything. Not with the front of his attention, but with the part underneath. The part that had been tuned from childhood to hear what was actually happening, beneath what was supposed to be happening. He heard the gap opening up in the center of the piece. He heard the audience feeling it without knowing what they were feeling. He heard 35 people in a room, beginning to lose the thread of why they were there. He picked up his case from beside the desk. He didn't decide to do it the way you decide a hard thing, by weighing it against the cost. The weighing had already happened in the chair beside Winston, in the kitchen with his mother's hands flat on his chest, in every year of doing the arithmetic and arriving at the same place. What happened now was something past deciding. There was a gap in the music, and he had the thing that could fill it, and not filling it would be its own kind of lie. The lie that said he was a thing best kept useful and unseen. He walked along the side of the hall without hurrying, because hurrying would have drawn the wrong kind of attention, and he came up the side steps to the stage the way he would have come up them any other night. Without apology, without announcement, and he unlatched the case and lifted out his trumpet and walked to the second microphone, the one that had been set up and never assigned, and he brought it to his lips. What came out of him was not the piece Connor was playing. It was a response to it. It found the gap in Connor's melody and slid underneath it, not to replace it, but to hold it up. The way you put your shoulder under something that is falling. It was something between accompaniment and conversation, the particular musical language of call and response that goes back past jazz, past any single tradition, back to the root of why people make music together at all. Because the sound one person makes alone is never quite the whole of what they mean. Connor heard it arrive before he understood what it was. His playing changed. Not dramatically, he didn't suddenly become someone he wasn't, but the absence that had been opening up in the center of the piece closed, because he was no longer alone in it. And not being alone allowed him to breathe, and breathing allowed him to remember what the notes were supposed to mean, rather than simply which ones came next. The audience felt it before they could name it. The coughing stopped. The glasses stayed still. And then Elias let the accompaniment go and moved to the front of what he was doing, not aggressively, not as a takeover, but because the music had arrived at the place where it needed to become something more than rescue. He had been holding back the way you hold back when you are supporting someone else's weight, and now he set the weight down gently and stood up straight and played. He played the way he had played alone in the hall at 6 in the morning when only the echo heard him. He played with everything the evening had cost, the desk at the back, the clipboard note that had been about his face and not his music, the 9 years of his mother's careful silence in these corridors. But he did not play it as grievance. He played it the way his grandmother had sung in a church that nobody came to record, as a statement of presence, as refusal and affirmation at once. The particular sound of someone who has been told the room is not for them deciding, without loudness, that they have always been in the room, heads turned, not toward Connor, but toward the second microphone. And the young man in the good jacket, with the water-stained fragment of sheet music pressed against his ribs, who was making a sound that some people in that hall had paid significant money to attend expensive venues to hear, and were discovering they had not, in fact, heard until this moment. Priya Johal put down her program. Near the hall entrance, Sandra Bowen had come in from the corridor where she had been working. She had heard the music change the way you hear a familiar voice in a crowd. Not by effort, but by some older recognition that doesn't go through the thinking part of the brain. She had stopped in the doorway with her cart behind her and one hand on the door frame, and she was listening to her son play in the room she had cleaned for 9 years. In front of the piece carried trades past for 9 years. And she did not move, because moving might break something. She was afraid. The fear was familiar, the calculation of what happened to people in her position when they or their children became visible in the wrong way, when they stopped being useful background and started being something that required the room to adjust. She knew what rooms like this did when they had to adjust. But the music kept coming, and it was her son's music, and it was not performing. It was not showcasing. It was simply and completely true, and the room was adjusting not the way she had feared, but the way rooms occasionally adjust when something true arrives in them unexpectedly, and they have no practiced response to it, and so they simply open. She pressed both hands over her mouth and stood in the doorway and let the music do what it was doing. The piece came to its natural close, not a composed ending, because Elias had gone somewhere the sheet music had never planned, but a real one, the kind that arrives when a piece of music has said the thing it needed to say and knows it. The last note opened, held, and let go. For 2 full seconds, the room was silent. Then someone in the second row stood up. Then someone behind them. Then the third row, fourth row. The whole hall rising in that particular order, where one person's courage makes the next person's easier, until everyone was on their feet, and the applause was the kind that doesn't feel like politeness. It was the sound of 200 people being surprised by something they hadn't known they were waiting for. Connor Fife, standing at his microphone, turned and looked at Elias with an expression that had nothing complicated in it. He began to clap, too. At the side of the hall, Winston Addo had appeared in the doorway of the maintenance corridor. He had a toolkit in his hand, and he was not going anywhere with it. He was standing in the doorway of the main hall of a building he had maintained for 17 years with his chin up, which was not the position he usually carried it in, and his eyes were wet, and his face was something close to something he hadn't felt in a long time. Dale Coburn was standing near the front. He was still standing near the front when the hall sat back down, and Priya Johal made her way to the stage and introduced herself to Elias, and he was still standing there when she spent 12 minutes talking to Elias about the provincial development program in a way that was not an inquiry but an invitation. He was present for all of it the way furniture is present, visible, unmoving, serving no particular function in the scene unfolding around him. He did not approach Elias that evening. He did not approach Giselle Harmon either, which was perhaps the more significant omission. Giselle noticed it, because she noticed most things, and she filed it alongside the other things she had noticed about Dale Coburn in 8 months. And she made a call the following morning to the Foundations Board chair that was not about the showcase. The kitchen of the Bowen apartment in Scarborough was small, the way all the rooms in it were small. Not unpleasantly, but honestly, the way small rooms are honest about the life lived in them. Sandra Bowen was sitting at the kitchen table when Elias came home, still in her work clothes, too tired to have changed and not wanting to go to bed before she heard the door. She stood up when he came in. The fear came back into her face for a second, the old arithmetic arriving by reflex before the new information could reach it, and then she saw his face and she sat back down and she put her head in her hands and she cried. He sat down across from her and waited. I thought, she started. She stopped. When you walked up to that stage, I thought, that's it. That's everything we've been holding together for 9 years coming apart in one night. I thought they'd take the job. I thought they'd take the program. I thought you were going to come home and there would be nothing. She pressed the back of her hand to her eyes. I have been so careful for so long. I taught you to be careful. I don't know if that was right. It kept us here, he said. It kept us here, she agreed. But staying here was never the whole point, was it? Staying here was supposed to be in service of something. She looked at him across the table. Your grandmother didn't play piano in that church for 40 years because it was safe. She played because it was the truest thing she had, and she played it in every room that would take it and some that didn't particularly want to. She reached out and touched his jacket pocket, the one with the fragment inside it. You kept that with you! Always. She would have walked up to that microphone too. Sandra's voice went quiet. I know she would have. I just got so worn down that I forgot she raised me, and I raised you, and the fear is not the whole of what we are. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You weren't wrong to be careful, he said. You kept us standing long enough to get here. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, which surprised them both, a real laugh. the kind that is cousin to crying and doesn't particularly distinguish between the two. Priya Johal called me on my cell, she said, while I was still in the parking lot. She said she was calling the number on file. I am apparently listed as your emergency contact for the program. What did she say? She said she had heard a great many talented young musicians in 15 years of this work. Sandra shook her head slowly, still half lawing, still half crying, entirely herself, and that some of them went on to great things and some of them didn't, and the difference was rarely about the talent. She said she knew which kind you were by the third bar. She squeezed his hand. She asked me if I had any idea how good my son was. Elias was quiet. I told her, Sandra said, that I had been watching him be exactly this good for 22 years, and I was gratified that the room had finally caught up. It did not resolve in a single evening the way things only do in the version of the story people tell later, when the middle has been edited for time. The provincial development program meant an audition, and the audition meant a wait, and the wait meant weeks of living in the ordinary uncertainty of a life where the extraordinary thing had happened but had not yet finished happening. Dale Coburn was gone from the director position by the end of the following month. The board chair's conversation with Giselle Harmon had led to a review, and the review had surfaced other things, and Dale departed with the quietly managed efficiency that institutions use when they want to correct a mistake without formally admitting to one. Giselle Harmon was named interim director. She accepted the title the way she accepted most things, without visible surprise and with immediate practical attention to the work. The audition letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in a plain envelope with a university crest on the upper left corner. Elias opened it at the kitchen table while his mother pretended not to watch from the counter. He read it twice. He folded it carefully and set it down. He looked up. "Well," Sandra said, from the counter, no longer pretending not to watch. "Well," he said. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and pulled him into her arms the way she had when he was small, which he wasn't anymore. But some gestures are not about size. The morning he left for the program's first residency, he took his trumpet case and his grandmother's fragment of sheet music, which had been in his pocket for 10 years and was not going anywhere. He tied a piece of faded ribbon around the handle of the case, his grandmother's ribbon, from a piece of music she had once given his mother, the color mostly gone out of it now, but the thing itself still holding. He carried it up the steps of a building that had been waiting, in its particular institutional way, for exactly the sound he had been carrying toward it, out of the back corridors and kitchen tables and careful, costly silences of everything that had come before. He walked through the door and added his voice to the room, and this time there was no curtain between him and where he was supposed to be. Maybe you know a room like that, a room you were told was not for you, or that you told yourself wasn't. Some stage, some table, some conversation you stood outside of because the arithmetic always seemed to come out the same way. Maybe you're still doing the math. Maybe you've already stepped through. Either way, I'd like to hear about it. The moment you stopped making yourself smaller, or the moment you almost did and didn't. The things that cost you, and the things that turned out to be worth the cost. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. The stories you leave there are where the next story begins.